Throughout Advent, there is one verse that has been on my mind quite a lot, and that verse comes from our reading today, John chapter 1, which is the traditional reading for Christmas Day. And the verse that I've been thinking about is verse 5, which says this: "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." Now, a few years ago, I was a curate for a church in Gypsy Hill, and the church was part of the Norwood and Brixton Food Bank. And every Christmas there was this bumper food bank session, and during that session I think over 100 food packages were given out, and those packages were going to feed 500 or more people over Christmas. And during those sessions, most of the volunteers were there to sort of take lists and then pack the food and then give the food out. Most people were there dealing with the practicalities. But every year there was a small team of us where our job was to talk to people and just to ask them how they were, what was happening in their lives, and if appropriate, we would then pray for them. And there was one year, I did this for a few years, I was part of this for a few years, and there was one year that is really hard for me to forget. Now, often when I would visit the food bank, I would meet people who were struggling, but there was often some hope that life, was going to improve. There was some possibility that life would get better. But that Christmas, I met a number of people who were really in overwhelmingly difficult circumstances where it was hard for them to see any hope at all. There was an immigrant family who were living in awful conditions. There was a young woman who was expecting a baby. I think she'd also been made redundant and she was on her own. And there were a few others as well whose situations were very, very difficult and tough. And as I talked to them that Christmas, even recognizing the help that Food Bank was giving, it was impossible for me to avoid the very real darkness that can exist in our world and that some people live with. And for the past couple of years, I think we have all been confronted with the darkness of this world. And even as we may have been looking forward to celebrating Christmas more fully and more freely than we were able to last year, quite suddenly the situation has got more serious again. Things have become much more difficult again, and suddenly we're having to adjust how we do Christmas, including putting this service online. And yet, as our passage from John tells us, when the Word became flesh, when Jesus was born, he was born as a light for all people, a light that shines in the darkness and that the darkness cannot overcome. And when we read the Gospels, when we look at Jesus' life, what we see is that he brings light through his teaching, through his healing and through his ministry. He brings light through his care for the poor and the lowly and those who were on the edges of society, those who had been cast out from society. But most of all, Jesus brings light to all people through the sacrificial love that he demonstrates on the cross and in his resurrection. Jesus willingly takes upon himself the darkness of the world. He suffers because of it, but then he rose again to new life. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And in Jesus, there is now an invitation for each one of us to receive this light for ourselves and to know this light in the midst of any darkness that we might struggle with or face. And yet, in order for us to receive this light in the midst of this world, we must first allow Jesus to help us recognize the darkness that also exists within us, in our own hearts and lives. It is only when we really see the love and the goodness of Jesus, as we read about in the Gospels, it's only then that we can really begin to understand the darkness that exists in our own lives. And yet, even as the light that Jesus brings enables us to recognize our sin and our shortcomings, Even as he does this, he is inviting us to know his forgiveness, to know healing, and to receive the opportunity for new life. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Just over a week before Christmas this year, I was feeling a bit shaky and a bit achy, and so I took a COVID test and it came back positive. And sadly, what that has meant is that I've needed to isolate through this final week of Advent, and it's meant missing one or two services already, and it'll mean that I'll miss one or two services over Christmas as well. But as I've been looking back and thinking about the events and services that I was able to join with and be a part of before this, the absolute highlight for me of Advent of this year, and actually one of the highlights of just the past few months generally, was joining with the St. Stephen's carol singing as we walked around the parish and we went to different estates and we sang a few carols and gave out some flyers for church. And for those of you who were there, you will know it was quite a cold night that we did the carol singing. But actually for me, in the midst of that cold and actually quite dark night, there was something really joyful about singing those carols. And especially what was really lovely is that as we were singing in different places, people would appear at their doors or window, or people would appear on their balconies, and people would just listen for a song or two. And we'd even get a little round of applause and some encouragement when we finished a carol. And as that happened, there was one man who he was actually up on, it was the first floor balcony, so he was just one floor up. And after we'd finished the carol, he just shouted out, "Thank you. This has been the highlight of my day." And I just chatted to him for a moment or two, and he shared with me that he was recovering from a broken leg, I think, or he'd injured his legs. And he said he was kind of recovering from that. He'd been in hospital. And he just said, life is really tough for me right now. But in a small, but in a very real way, I think the carol singing was bringing just something of light, of Christ's light to him. And that, of course, is what we are called to do. As we receive and celebrate the light of Jesus on Christmas Day, we are called to bear witness to that light and to share the light of Christ through our words and through our actions. In the midst of the difficulties of this world, we have received hope, and we have a hope and a light that we can share with others, as long as we hold on to Jesus and the light that he brings to us. And so today, on this Christmas Day, whatever Christmas Day looks like for you, and it may be that you've had to adjust your own plans and plans with your family as well, but whatever Christmas Day looks like for you today, I do hope and pray that the light of Christ will be made known to you, and that you will be able to take hold of that light and the hope that Christ brings, and that will enable you to share this light and hope with others. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.